Hi, Kellen Rouse. It's been a little while since I have made one of these videos. I'm also holding a very, very, very tiny kitten. I know, so if you hear her meowing while I'm making the video, that's what it is. Say hello. She doesn't have a name yet. I'm not sure what her name is going to be. Oh, but she's very loquacious. Okay. All right, sweetie. So I have had another session since the last time that I made a video, and in this session we started to address sexual abuse, and we specifically addressed the first time that I was molested by someone, which was when I was 11, and it was my stepdad. So the idea, again, with the EMDR that I'm doing, it's okay, sweetie. The EMDR that I'm doing is that you start with the earliest instance, your earliest memory of a trauma, and the hope is that that sort of helps to, for lack of a better words, knock the legs out from under the other trauma so that your brain can process it. This one was pretty difficult. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. I think I've kind of dealt with the actual event of the molestation pretty well over the years and other kinds of therapy. But what remains with me, and the thing that I really continue to work on and will have to continue to work on, it's okay, baby, is the trauma the trauma associated with what happened after. So, and that actually will be what my next session will be trying to address. So when I was molested, I was strong and courageous enough to go and tell my mom about it. My mom discussed it with my stepfather. He, of course, denied it and denying. This is okay, I'll get into that in a minute. So he denied it, and my mother chose to believe him, chose not to believe me. I, about a year later, told my father about it. My father came in like a white knight, my biological father, who lived 500 miles away, and hadn't been super involved with us, but had always been a part of our lives. He came in like a white knight and just totally saved me, basically. So we first tried to bring a criminal case against him, but the laws in Mississippi at the time, and in many places still, and probably still in Mississippi, were that if you didn't have at least two victims, or a victim and a witness, because pedophiles generally abuse children with witnesses, that you couldn't bring a criminal case. And so I was unable to bring a criminal case against my stepfather, so it then turned into a civil case for custody. The first case was, my dad didn't win, because according to the courts, and I have the papers, I mean, it's unbelievable. The courts, I had such a high IQ and hated living in Mississippi so much that they had a hard time believing my story, that a year earlier I had been molested, or about a year and a half at that point I had been molested. Fast forward a year and a half after that, yes, I know, and my sister, my younger sister, finally came forward, was able to find the courage to come forward, and the court had to amend its decision and say that, in fact, there was more than sufficient evidence to show that my stepfather had molested my younger sister, even though when I brought the accusation that there wasn't enough evidence, I think the term they used, at law, for them to bring a case or to believe me. So basically they kind of had to admit in the court papers that they were wrong, even though they didn't it never says we now believe that the older child was being molested, but that's sort of the implication, since the younger child clearly was. So where my trauma lies with this actually is not being believed, and is not being believed, and also that in that 2 years after, I told my mom and then later my dad, and then we went through all of the court cases, that allowed my stepfather to continue molesting my younger sister for 2 additional years, because it turned out that by the time he decided to try to molest me, he had already been molesting my younger sister for a year. So he molested my younger sister from the time that she was 8 until she was 11 years old. 8 to 11. And did everything short of penile penetration. He had her do sex acts on him. I'm not going to get into all the details, that's her story, but the fact that not only did my mother disbelieve me, but the courts, in the papers it says it's not just the judge, but also the social worker and then some other person, I forget who, have a hard time believing my story. Because, 12-year-olds usually consistently tell stories like this and are completely horrified talking about that kind of thing. So there was when I was bringing this case, one of the things that happened to me as a 12-year-old is that I was taken back to the judge's chambers, because I guess this was considered better for children than to have me, go on the stand and testify. But I was taken back to the judge's chambers and questioned by the judge and by the lawyers, all of whom were male. So I had a bunch of old white dudes questioning me. Sound familiar? Sound familiar to anyone? Okay. A bunch of old white dudes questioning me, asking me questions like, did he penetrate you with his finger? And I specifically remember that because I didn't know what the word penetrate meant. And then they explained it to me, and I still had a hard time answering the question because I didn't really understand what they were asking exactly, and I didn't know how to answer that question at 12 years old. I had no advocate, I had no social worker there was no psychologist there wasn't even the only female person in the room actually was the court reporter who was, taking notes. So she wasn't involved in the questioning, she was just there. So I'm there, I'm mortified, and then after all of that, the courts find that they don't believe me. And again, that allowed my little sister to be molested for 2 more years. So I've been having a lot of trouble with this Kavanaugh case. I actually had to go home early on Friday because I started crying at work and couldn't stop. And I just left in the middle of the day and came home. I had to deactivate my Facebook account because I'm old and I still use Facebook, and I had to take a news break. I haven't been able to bring myself to actually watch the hearing, but I've seen snippets of it and I've seen some accounts of it, and my friends posting about it, my family, who are all a bunch of right-wing nuts, just, oh my God, posting things about it. And to have all of the questions really being focused on her believability has been extremely triggering to me. The images of all of these old white men questioning this woman, super triggering. The face that's been splashed all over the media that Kavanaugh made, where he's clearly looking angry and then crying. What I consider crocodile tears about this accusation. All of that is incredibly triggering, and so what I'm realizing that I need to seriously deal with my next session is this not being believed after being sexually molested, because it seems like that seems to be the thing that is continuing to trigger me and that is continuing to cause me to have problems. I'm often concerned about whether someone's going to believe me or think that I'm lying about something, even when there's really no reason for them to do that. It's like a paranoid thing, I'm constantly trying to prove my believability and prove that the things that I say and that my viewpoints are accurate. It's almost, it's certainly something that takes a lot of my energy. I won't say that it's obsessive because I don't think it's at that point, but it takes a lot of my energy when I'm concerned that if I, call into work sick, that my boss isn't going to believe me, or if I tell someone, one of the stories from my past that are almost truly unbelievable because they're so just incredibly screwed up, that people aren't going to believe me. And this is something that has been a problem for a very, very long time. So I'm not going to go all into the actual session that I did a couple weeks ago with the sexual abuse. We were able to resolve it in the session, I feel like, but we did decide again that what I really, really need to work on is all of the trauma from not being believed after the sexual abuse. And so I guess I want to end this, considering the political climate right now and the Me Too movement and all of these women coming forward against powerful men, with the fact, with a like a statement about the fact that the part where you're not believed after you're sexually assaulted can be just as traumatic, if not more so, than the actual assault. And that might be really difficult to understand, and it really, is different for different people, of course. But I've heard a lot of people with Dr. Ford saying something like, oh, she got dry humped at a party and she's traumatized forever. That's not necessarily the traumatic thing. Yes, having someone hold you down and thinking that you're about to be raped and not being able to breathe, those are certainly things that can cause trauma to a person being attacked. And holding it in for years because you're afraid to talk about it, because you're afraid people aren't going to believe you, or you're afraid that people are going to dismiss you, and then finally coming forward, how many years later? I think it was like 34, 36 years later, because you see that your attacker is about to be confirmed to the highest court in the land and to be harassed to the point that you have to move out of your home with your family into a secret guarded location. That is the trauma. That's where the trauma lies. And that's where the trauma lies for so many women. And we know that this is going to happen. We know it's going to happen. If it hasn't happened to us, it's happened to someone we know. It's happened to several people that we know. Women try to come forward. They want to come forward and they're not believed. They're called liars. There any other number of issues. Their character is brought into question, and they're revealing one of the most personal and hurtful things that someone can really do to a person. And so, I'm not discounting, of course, male survivors of sexual abuse, any survivors of abuse who have to go through the secondary trauma of not being believed and being called a liar and seeing your attacker go free. That's where the trauma is. Please, please keep that in mind. Thanks.